I was 22 years old when my brother stood over my hospital bed, looked me in the eyes, and said, "You'll only slow us down." I had tubes in my nose. My legs were crushed. My entire future, everything I had worked for, was gone in an instant, and the one person I thought would fight for me. My own brother walked out of that room like I didn't even exist. In that moment, my life was shattered. Before the accident, I was the guy with the six-pack, the scholarship, the one everyone said would develop and become a great man. After the accident, I was just a burden no one wanted to deal with. My name's Kellen Royce. I am 32 now. I own a tech company that builds devices for people like me, for people living with disabilities who are tired of being ignored. 10 years ago, everything I had was destroyed. My family, my money, my freedom, all of it was draining away while I lay helpless in bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering why the people I loved were turning their backs on me. Let me tell you how it happened and what I did about it. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, in a house where image mattered more than truth. My mom, Ellen, was the kind of woman who kept the couch plastic wrapped in case guests came over. My dad, Martin, was a blue-collar man who worked overtime, but never had time for emotions. He believed pain should be swallowed, kept as a secret. And then there was my older brother, Darren, 4 years ahead of me, high school football captain, prom king, college dropout turned real estate flipper. He could sell water to a drowning man, and my parents adored him for it. But I wasn't jealous. We were different. And that was okay with me. I was quiet, driven, good with code. I got a full scholarship to a tech school. I started building an app for runners to track their muscle engagement using wearable sensors. My professors thought I had real potential. I even started pitching it to investors. Everything was lining up. I believed I was sitting on the edge of something big. Then came the accident. I was biking home from a night shift at a cafe when a drunk driver ran a red light. I remember the sound before anything else. Metal screaming, bones snapping. When I woke up in the hospital days later, I couldn't feel my legs. I tried to lift them. Nothing. Panic took over. Nurses came in, faces too calm, like they'd rehearsed this 100 times. Later, the doctor explained I had suffered a spinal cord injury. The damage was permanent. I was paralyzed from the waist down. He said it as gently as he could, but there is no soft way to say you'll never walk again. The next few days were a blur of medications and blurry faces. My parents came, stiff and awkward. My mom wiped tears from her eyes, but never touched my hand. My dad stood in the corner and stared at the floor. They didn't say much. But Darren, he didn't even fake it. He walked in, looked me up and down, and said, "Man, this is bad, real bad." I tried to smile through the fog. "Good to see you too." "You know," he said, "Uncle Reed was asking about your trust fund. He thinks you should transfer it now before the taxes get worse. Might as well put it to good use, right?" My jaw clenched. That trust fund was from our grandfather. It was supposed to be split between us when we turned 30. It was the last thing I had to hold on to, meant to give me a head start after school. Now Darren was talking to me about it days after I was injured. "You can't be serious," I said. And he said it. Those words I'll never forget. "You'll only slow us down." He didn't even flinch. He just patted my shoulder, told me I'd be taken care of, and left the room like it was just another business deal. That week, Uncle Reed signed off on the release. Darren walked away with nearly $250,000. My share of the trust included. And my parents, they didn't fight it. My mom said, "Darren will use it more wisely right now. We'll make sure you are okay." My dad didn't even look at my face. That is when I knew I wasn't part of the family anymore. I was an excess they couldn't afford to carry. I was a disappointment, a complication, a reminder that bad things can happen. But I didn't stay broken. 10 years later, Darren showed up at my office. Same guy, just older. lost the swagger. Lines on his face. Divorce papers probably still warm in his glove box. He had a folder in his hand, a resume like he'd forgotten everything. He walked up to me and said, "Kellen, I need a fresh start." I thought maybe he'd say a word. I just turned and pointed behind me. On the wall, in bold black letters, was a sign I had installed. The day we opened our headquarters, it read, "Respect is earned here." The answer I needed to give was written behind me. And that is where this story really begins. Before the accident, I thought I had my whole life figured out. I didn't come from money, but I was building something real for myself. I was in my final year of college studying software engineering with a minor in biomechanics. I ran track. I freelanced on the side coding websites for small businesses. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with my best friend from high school, and we split rent so I could save every extra dime to fund my startup idea. People used to tell me I was too ambitious. They said I should just finish school, get a safe job, climb the ladder like everyone else. But I didn't want that. I had this vision for a wearable tech device that could give real-time muscle and posture feedback to runners and athletes. My professors loved the concept. One of them, Dr. Langston Wells, said I had the kind of brain investors pray for. That stuck with me. I started building a prototype and testing it on myself during runs. It was working. My dream was to build a company that helped people move better, train smarter, avoid injuries. The irony hits hard now. Back then, everything was movement, speed, pushing limits. My world revolved around my body doing what I asked of it. My legs were machines. This trust wasn't for nothing. Growing up, loving my family was something you obtained by doing, not feeling. My parents weren't cruel, but warmth wasn't something they gave freely. My mom, Ellen, was meticulous. She ran our house like a cruise ship, perfectly scheduled. Everything spotless. Emotions were kept folded and stored away. If you cried, she asked, what triggered it, not how you felt. My dad, Martin, was a mechanic, hard-working, quiet, always tired. He wasn't mean, just inaccessible. He'd work 12 hours, come home, lie down, and stare at the television. You could talk to him, but he wouldn't complete his sentences, like he'd rather be anywhere else. And then there was my older brother, Darren. He was always the loud one, the charming one, the aggressive one, who could walk into a room and own it in seconds. In high school, he was a star, quarterback. Yearbook voted him most likely to run for office. He tried community college, but dropped out after a year and started flipping houses with a buddy. He was flashy, fast, talking, always on to the next hustle. My parents looked at him and saw confidence. They looked at me and saw potential, which is another way of saying, you are not there yet. Still, I didn't resent him. Darren and I weren't close, but we weren't enemies. We were brothers who chose different lanes. I just assumed we respected each other in our own way. Our grandfather, Elias, passed away when I was 15. He left behind a sizable trust fund for Darren and me, to be split in half when we each turned 30. Grandpa Elias had worked in construction his whole life, but he'd made smart investments in land and stocks. He wanted us to have a safe haven to build our futures. My parents never touched it. They said it was off limits until the time was right. I was counting on it to help launch my business once I graduated. At 22, I wasn't living in luxury, but I felt rich in purpose. I had a plan, a prototype, a mentor, and a notebook full of sketches and user flowcharts. I'd spend hours sitting at my desk writing code, then wake up early for morning runs before class. I loved feeling my feet hit the ground, my heart pounding in my chest, the wind caressing my face. I felt unstoppable. It wasn't just about proving something to the world. It was about proving something to myself, that I could build something from scratch that mattered, that I could change my life without waiting for permission. My circle was small but tightly knit. My roommate Sean was my hype man. He believed in my project more than I did some days. We used to joke that one day he'd be my head of marketing, and I'd put his face on a billboard. It didn't feel impossible. We were young, hungry, and full of momentum. There were no warning signs, no foreshadowing. Just one of those nights where I stayed late at the cafe, closed my laptop at 1 a.m., and decided to bike home to save on an Uber. I had done it 100 times before. I had my helmet on. My lights were working. I wasn't distracted. I followed every rule, but none of that mattered. That one decision. The choice to bike home instead of calling a ride changed my entire life. In seconds, my legs went silent. My dreams, my identity, everything I had tied to motion and mobility gone. And when I woke up in that hospital, tubes and monitors surrounding me, my bones broken, what I expected was love. What I hoped for was reassurance. What I got instead was silence, judgment, and the cold realization that in my family value only existed if you could stand on your own 2 feet. I didn't just lose the ability to walk. I lost my own family. And what came next, the harm they inflicted on me at my most vulnerable moment, broke me in ways no injury ever could. The first time I saw myself in a mirror after the surgery, I didn't recognize the man staring back. My face was pale, eyes hollowed by pain and medication. My body looked thinner, fragile, foreign. But what got me most was the stillness. From the waist down, there was nothing. Not even a twitch. It was like someone had drawn a hard line across my body and declared, "This part no longer belongs to you." The doctors were clear. The spinal cord injury was permanent. There was no miraculous recovery, no last-minute recovery plan. They offered physical therapy to strengthen my upper body, wheelchair training, and emotional counseling. I said yes to all of it. Not because I felt hopeful, but because I had no choice. I didn't cry when they told me I would never walk again. I nodded. I asked questions. I kept it all locked inside. But when the room was empty and the lights were off, I would stare at the ceiling and try to picture my future. I couldn't see anything. I openly waited for my family to show up. The first person to visit was my mom. She came alone, carrying a gift basket with fruits I couldn't eat and magazines I didn't care about. She smiled like she was trying to convince herself that everything was going to be fine. She sat down and said, "The doctor said you are going to adapt quickly. They have some really impressive equipment these days." I wanted her to hold my hand. I wanted her to say it was okay to feel broken, but instead she pulled out a clipboard with brochures for assisted living facilities and talked about insurance. My father came the next day. He didn't stay long. "You are strong. You'll figure this out," he said. Then he asked how soon I could be discharged because hospital bills add up fast. And then Darren came. He strolled into the room with that same cocky look he always wore. Not a trace of worry on his face. He looked me up and down like I was a failed investment. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I was scared. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and said, "Look, we've been talking to Uncle Reed. He thinks it is a good idea to transfer your share of the trust now before it just sits there wasting away." I blinked. I couldn't speak for a second. I thought I'd misheard him. "My share. That money's mine," I said. He shrugged. "Yeah, but let's be honest. You are not exactly launching a company now, are you? I've got a deal going on that could double our money in a year. We can put your name on the papers, but I'd be managing the investment." He was calm, like he was doing me a favor. I pushed the call button for the nurse and said nothing. A few hours later, Uncle Reed showed up. He wasn't warm either. He was professional, dressed in a navy suit, holding documents in a leather folder. He explained that with my condition, it might make more sense to transfer the funds to a trustee. Darren, as my closest family member with financial experience, would be responsible for maximizing the value on my behalf. I asked if I had a choice. He said I could legally refuse, but the family had already come to a unified understanding. That night, I sat in bed while the nurse adjusted my IV, and I felt a deep pressure settle in my chest. Not from the injury, but from the realization that my family had already moved on. I wasn't the person they had plans for anymore. I was an invalid they didn't want to deal with. A few days later, I overheard Darren in the hallway talking to a nurse. He didn't know I could hear him. He said, "Look, I know he is my brother, but I can't put my whole life on hold for someone who can't even take care of himself. He'll only slow us down." That was the moment everything broke. The pain of losing my legs was one thing. The pain of being treated like I didn't matter, like my life was now a liability. That was something deeper. That was betrayal. Cruel and sharp. They stopped visiting after that. Calls became infrequent. The tone was always the same, detached business. Like, "How are your therapy sessions? Have the doctors said anything new? Do you need anything else from us?" When I was discharged from the hospital 6 weeks later, no one came to pick me up. The rehab facility arranged for transport. I was wheeled into a basic one-room apartment provided by a charity partnership with the hospital. It was clean, quiet, and empty. That night, I stared out the window at the snow falling and felt something settle inside me. Anger, yes, but also clarity. My family had made their choice. They wrote me off quietly and permanently. The worst part, they didn't even think they were doing anything wrong. To them, this was practical, efficient, necessary. But I wasn't gone. They thought they had left me behind. What they didn't realize was that this was the beginning of something entirely different. Something they couldn't predict, and definitely couldn't control. The first few weeks after I was discharged were brutal. I was alone in a room designed for survival, not comfort. My wheelchair barely fit through the kitchen entrance. The faucet handles were stiff. The bed was too low, and my arms weren't strong enough yet to transfer myself easily. Every move felt like a battle. I dropped things constantly and had to learn how to retrieve them with the reacher. I fell twice trying to get into the bathroom. Each time I had to drag myself to the couch and pull up using every bit of strength I had left. No one came to help. There were moments when I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over my mother's number, wanting to hear something, anything that made me feel like I still belonged somewhere. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't force people to love me. Not after everything. Instead, I started asking myself a different question. What can I control? It was the only thing that got me through those first nights. I couldn't walk. I couldn't fix the betrayal. But I could still think. I could still build. I had my old laptop, slow but usable. I set it up I started watching tutorials on accessibility technology, not out of curiosity but survival. I needed to learn how others like me were managing their lives. What tools were out there? What wasn't working? What could be better? One video changed everything. It featured a quadriplegic man using a homemade voice-controlled system to operate lights, send texts, and play music. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. I watched it 3 times, then opened my code editor. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not because I was trying to keep it secret, but because I didn't want sympathy dressed up as encouragement. I didn't want anyone saying, "That is inspiring." With that pitying smile people give when they've already decided you are a lost cause. I wasn't trying to inspire anyone. I was trying to survive. At first, I focused on small things. Gesture-based navigation for people with limited motor function. Eye-tracking systems that didn't cost thousands. I joined online forums for developers working on inclusive tech. I introduced myself as a newbie, even though I had been coding for years. I wanted to learn everything I could from scratch, this time with different eyes. I reconnected with Dr. Langston Wells, my old professor. He hadn't heard about my accident. When I told him, he paused for a moment, then said, "Are you still building?" I said yes. He offered to mentor me again. Weekly Zoom calls, design critiques, and access to his university's assistive tech lab database. This mentorship saved me. Over time, I stopped thinking about what I had lost and started focusing on what I was creating. I sketched out designs for a modular controller system, one that could be reconfigured for different mobility needs. It didn't rely on muscle memory. It adapted to the user, not the other way around. I called it FlexFrame. I didn't have startup capital or manufacturing experience, but I had something better: clarity. I knew who I was building for. I understood their pain because I lived it every day. Launched a YouTube channel under the name Kellen Codes. My first few videos were raw. I demoed free software hacks, reviewed adaptive gear, and shared what worked for me and what didn't. I didn't sugarcoat anything. People appreciated the honesty. The channel grew. I started getting emails from veterans, accident survivors, and parents of kids with disabilities. They weren't just asking questions. They were asking for hope. That was when I realized I wasn't alone anymore. With each new project, I got stronger, not just emotionally, but physically too. My arms built muscle. My mind got sharper. I began taking contract jobs in UX design, then reinvested every dime into developing my prototypes. I applied for disability grants, startup competitions, anything that might help me get a foothold. This was never about revenge. I wasn't doing this to prove something to Darren or my parents. I had let go of that poison a long time ago. What fueled me now was purpose. People like me had been forgotten. We were treated like side notes in someone else's story. But I wasn't a footnote. I was the author now. After 3 years, I officially launched my company, Axion Adaptive. I hired 2 developers and a marketing assistant who had been following my channel since the beginning. We operated out of a shared workspace crammed with cables and empty coffee cups. But we were building something real. We partnered with a nonprofit that provided tech to disabled students, then a rehab hospital. Then the VEA reached out. The momentum was building, and for the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was growing. The world my family left me to rot in was the same world I was rebuilding from the ground up. One day, I got a message on LinkedIn. It was Darren. He said he'd heard about the company. He'd been through some tough years and was looking for a fresh start. He said he was proud of me. He asked if we could meet. I stared at that message for a long time, and then I smiled, because I knew what was coming next. It was a Thursday morning when he walked in. The front door chimed, and I looked up from my monitor to see a man in a wrinkled dress shirt standing just inside the glass lobby of Axion Adaptive. He held a manila folder in his hands, the kind someone carries when they're trying to make a good impression, but didn't have time or money for a new briefcase. It was Darren. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade. Not in person, not face to face. Not since he stood over my hospital bed and stole the last piece of security I had left. He looked older. His jaw wasn't as sharp. The bags under his eyes told me life had stopped giving him the easy route. His expensive watch was gone. His hairline had receded. He stood there for a moment, scanning the space like he wasn't sure if he should be there at all. My assistant, Laya, walked up to him. "Can I help you?" she asked. Polite but firm. We had strict policies about walk-ins. Most of our meetings were by appointment only, especially with investors or media. "I am looking for Kellen Royce," he said, voice low but familiar. "I am his brother." I wheeled out from my office. The hallway leading from my desk to the lobby was long, lined with posters of our early product prototypes and client success stories, photos of kids in wheelchairs using our game controllers, veterans using our smart switches to control their homes. We had filled that hallway with people who refused to be defined by what others assumed they couldn't do. And there at the end of it was Darren, the same man who once said, I would only slow them down. I stopped a few feet in front of him. He looked surprised. Maybe he expected me to be different. Smaller, bitter, less composed. Instead, I wore a tailored shirt, sharp dark slacks, and a badge clipped to my chest that read, Founder and CEO. He smiled like we were old friends. Hey, he said, you look good. I nodded once. What do you want, Darren? He hesitated, holding out the documents. I've been following what you've done here. Axion's making waves, the VA contract. That is big. Honestly, I am proud of you. I didn't take the folder. He let it hang in the air for a moment, then slowly lowered it. He kept going. Things haven't been great on my end. Business went south. Divorced 2 years ago, had to sell the house. I've been trying to rebuild, and I thought maybe we could work together. I've got ideas. I know marketing. I know people. I could help. He looked around like he was trying to sell himself to the walls. I was thinking director of business strategy, or maybe something in development. I can learn. I studied him, not with hate, not with rage, just clarity. Do you remember what you said to me the last time we spoke? I asked. He lowered his eyes. I remember, he said. I was wrong. I made a mistake. You were wrong, I repeated. You emptied my account and left me in a rehab center with nothing. You stood there while I was in a hospital bed and told me I was dead weight. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. You didn't just give up on me. You made sure no one else believed in me either, and now you want a seat at this table. He took a small step forward. I made a mistake, he said. I didn't know what to do back then. I was scared. I was paralyzed. The silence after that was loud behind me. Past the double glass doors leading into our main floor hung a sign I had commissioned the day we opened our first office. Simple black lettering on brushed steel. Respect is earned here. I turned slightly and pointed toward it. Darren looked past me and read the words. He nodded slowly, realizing this wasn't going the way he hoped. I get it, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I just thought maybe you'd understand. I do, I said. That is why I am not throwing you out, but I am not giving you a shortcut into something I built while you were laughing behind my back. He looked down. For the first time, I saw something in him that felt real. Not performance, not charm, just shame. I hope you find what you are looking for, I said. He turned to leave. The door clicked shut behind him. I rolled back toward my desk. A few stood at their cubicles, watching from a respectful distance. No one said a word they didn't need to. They knew what that moment meant. Not revenge, not power, just peace. I sat down, unlocked my laptop, and opened the product roadmap for our next device. There was still work to do. After Darren walked out of my office, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cold. I felt calm, steady. That moment was never about payback. It wasn't about humiliating him or showing him who I had become. It was about finally closing a door I had spent years staring at, waiting for someone to walk back through it with an apology that never came. He came back, yes, but not to take accountability. He came back because life had finally given him a dose of the struggle I had faced alone. And when he realized I'd built something he couldn't, he wanted in. I didn't say no to punish him. I said no because it was the first time in my life I had full control over who I allowed into my world. That power didn't come from anger. It came from knowing my value. When my family turned their backs on me, I didn't realize at the time that I had gained something far more important. I had gained a reason to start over. Not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that my life still had meaning. Over the years, I built more than a business. I built a community. I met people whose courage left me speechless. Children with spinal injuries designing apps on tablets. Veterans using our devices to write books, paint digital art, launch side hustles. I saw what happens when you give people tools instead of pity. They rise. We grew from a 2-person startup in a shared space to a team of 50 working across 3 cities. Our products are now in schools, clinics, and homes across the country. We're designing for accessibility from the start, not as an afterthought. We're making inclusion the standard, not the exception. People sometimes ask if I've forgiven my family. The answer is yes. But forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door. It means letting go of the weight they left on me. I carried that for too long. I let it shape my self-worth, my relationships, my nights, but not anymore. I don't hate them. I hope they're well. I hope they sleep better knowing I am no longer angry. I am just done waiting for them to be the family I needed. I found that family elsewhere. My team, my clients, the people who never asked me to prove my worth before, offering respect. They're the ones I show up for now. Looking back, I wouldn't change the accident. That surprises people when I say it, but it is true. Losing the ability to walk forced me to stand in a different way. I had to rebuild not just my body, but my beliefs. I stopped chasing approval. I stopped waiting to be saved. I became the person who builds the ladder instead of waiting for someone to throw one down. If you are watching this because you've been left behind by family, friends, or the world itself, I want to tell you something. No one told me you are not broken. You are not a burden. You are not your injury, your setback, or the moment someone gave up on you. You are still here. And that means you still have time to rewrite your story. Start where you are. Use what you have. And if you can't find a door, I didn't get here because someone gave me a handout. I got here because I made a choice. I chose not to let their silence define me. I chose to listen to the small voice inside me that said, "Keep going, you are not done yet." I am not done now either. There is still so much to do, so many people to reach, so many tools left to build. But every now and then when I roll through our headquarters and see a new employee onboarding or hear from a mother whose son can now play video games again, because of one of our devices, I pause. I breathe, and I think about the boy I was lying in that hospital bed convinced that his life had ended. He was wrong. It had just begun. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that strength isn't about what you've lost, but what you choose to build, take a second to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their story isn't over. Drop a comment below and tell me what part hit you the hardest. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and honest, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here for people who've been counted out but came back stronger. Thanks for watching, and remember, no one else gets to define your worth. Keep going. You are not done yet.